group for the presentation. And it's a nice segue into the next presentation because many of the projects that were just illustrated for you are funded by this new federal Delaware River program that Friends of the Upper Delaware River, Trout Unlimited, and I should add our local coalitions, the Upper Delaware River Tailwaters Coalition is also involved. These are local governments in Delaware County. We're also extending some of this project work into Wayne County, Pennsylvania, and Sullivan County, New York as well. So that is the topic, or at least a substantial part of the next topic of next presentation, which is our work with the group called the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed. Sandra Miola and Kelly Knutson are here with us today. Some of you have met them from previous years. I can't overstate the importance of this coalition. This is the coalition that's based in Trenton, New Jersey, full-time staff people. They are primarily overseeing federal policy and legislation that impacts the Delaware River from top to bottom. But they're also engaged with state level groups like FUDR in New York as the lead organization. And we work to implement the policy priorities for this coalition in the state of New York. That's part of our responsibility here and a big part of our relationship here. So Sandra is going to start off, and she's going to tell us a little bit about the coalition, kind of where it's been, where it's going. It's what's happening on Capitol Hill, its relationship to the state of New York, and then Kelly's going to talk about the state-based policy efforts that we are now embarking upon, we being FUDR and our New York coalition partners, many of whom are on the phone today, and the work we're doing up in Albany to try to generate state-level funding for Upper Delaware River. So Sandra, with that, I think I will hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeff. And hi, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, can you, I don't know why it's not coming up as full screen. Let me try again.
It looks good.
Oh, it does? Full screen? Okay, great. Yeah, so hey everyone, thanks so much Jeff and folks at FUDR. Really excited to be here this morning, and thank you for all your work you're doing in the Upper Delaware River. My name is Sandra Miola. I'm the director of the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed. As Jeff mentioned, we're a staff of 4 full-time staff members, and our mission is really to bring all of these partners together. We have about over 150 non-governmental, nonpartisan organizations that are all committed to protecting and preserving the natural resources, the lands and waters of the Delaware River watershed. So 4-state region, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. And, you know, it's the membership itself is so diverse. You know, we have, you know, really small groups, you know, working on the front lines of watershed protection. We also have, you know, a nice mix of regional groups and also large national groups that really, you know, fuel our efforts. And, you know, one of the really exciting things that we do is we spend quite a bit of time in DC on Capitol Hill. Well, at least before March we did. It was actually funny, we were all in DC the day before a lot of our you know, watershed states shut down due to the pandemic. Luckily, everyone came home safe and healthy, as far as I know, at least. And it was really just such an interesting experience and sobering at that, seeing what happened and what transpired in the weeks after. But you know, typically we take a fairly large group with us down to DC every March around appropriation time. And as Congressman Matt Cartwright was talking about, you know, one of our keystone programs, our keystone priorities is advocating for federal funding for the Delaware River Basin Restoration Program. And that is the program that, you know, awarded first-time historic funding to the watershed, specifically for restoration and conservation efforts. And that program is administered by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I believe Mike Slattery is on Zoom. I think I saw him before. And you know, the core of that program is a grant program. So think of it as kind of like a donut in a donut, I guess. And that grant program is the Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund. And that is the grant program that supports a lot of this work happening in the last 3 years, since the program just started in 2018, and already it's been incredibly successful. So just wanted to show some photos here of all of us on the Hill. And it's wonderful when we're also able to bring constituents down with us, and that's something that we've been strategizing how to do, but better job with moving forward too. I think constituents play such a vital role when they're talking to legislators, and really have that storytelling element. So if any of you are interested, or know anyone who's interested, once we're able to, we're probably going to do a virtual Hill Week this year in March, but hopefully we'll be back in person in 2022, which seems odd to say. But specifically for our members, FUDR in particular is such a critical member for us, that Kelly will talk about in a little bit. FUDR is our New York state lead, who is our boots on the ground in New York. And FUDR has been able to provide personal connections for us to some of the critical legislators that we work with to advocate for the Delaware Fund, along with some of our other federal and watershed-wide priorities. So it's leveraging their knowledge, and we're helpful to beef up some of their communications and advocacy messaging as well. So it's kind of a nice two-way relationship there, and one of our favorite coalition members, if I do say so myself. I love this slide. I was working on this when I was talking to Jeff and Sherry about this presentation, and I think it really shows what a collective group can really do when they're all under the same tent and moving together toward a goal of increased federal funding for the watershed. So you'll see in 2018, the program started off with $5 million. A year later, a modest increase of $1 million, bringing it up to $6 million. And then this past year, we received a 62% increase. And the DRBRP, or Dr. Burp, as my colleague Drew fondly calls it, is funded at $9.7 million for 2020. We're currently advocating for $10 million for fiscal year 2021. So hopefully that will come into fruition, but right now there is a continuing resolution in effect to fund the federal government through December 11th, and we're hoping to get some celebrations in order once that happens, and that spending bill for the interior is moved forward. And so this funding directly goes, it's within the Department of Interior budget, allocated to Fish and Wildlife Service. Fish and Wildlife Service allocates a portion to it for the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, who administers the grant program. And I think this might be my last slide, which I'll talk a little bit about this. You see us with Congressman Antonio Delgado. This was, we were on the Hill on the picture on the left, maybe last winter. It's all fuzzy now. And then the picture on the right was a FUDR event and Trout Unlimited event celebrating funding going directly to the Upper Delaware for the projects that were mentioned earlier. So just so important to recognize, the members of Congress that have, championed this work with us, alongside our partners far and wide, and, recognizing that. So we were really excited to do that. And, I think a lot of the success has really come from building relationships with the members of Congress. Representative Delgado is still, a freshman member of Congress. And the first week, during swearing in week last January, or 2 Januaries ago rather, we went down to the Hill, and we met with all of them. We met with the congressmen and several other legislators to get in their office and introduce ourselves as soon as possible. So, to build the relationship from the get-go, which, really suited us well and resulted in some success down the road. So, I love that we are able to celebrate a total of 3.8 million grant funds that have been allocated to the Upper Delaware throughout New York for restoration projects to date. This number doesn't just reflect FUDR's grants that they've received, but all grants that were awarded for organizations and entities in the state of New York. So really incredible success there. Moving forward, we would love to see more grant proposals and more diverse, entities that do apply for these funds. One of the challenges that a lot of smaller, particularly small organizations have is the match requirement that NIFWIF requires, which is a one-to-one match, non-federal match. And so we've been working to kind of connect the dots with eligible entities that have match, that maybe don't have quite enough, and partner them up with organizations or other agencies, cross partnership initiatives that can bolster up that match and strengthen the project proposal. So moving forward, we're actually working on a survey, which I hope you all will get the chance to see soon. We're launching a survey, hopefully mid next week, to try to get a handle on the demand for shovel-ready projects throughout the watershed, for restoration and conservation projects, those that will aim to improve fish and wildlife habitat, improve recreation opportunities, water quality, etc. So we can have a better understanding of that fiscal demand to then enable us to advocate more effectively with appropriators and folks on the Hill to maintain and increase this funding for the Delaware River Basin Restoration Program. Also, we'd like to have a better sense of which organizations are actually, which specific organizations, the names of the organizations that are having trouble with match requirements, so we can do our due diligence and conduct outreach. And it'll be really interesting to see the makeup of those organizations, like what their operational budgets are, how many staff they have, and we'll be able to have as much data, hopefully, as possible to really elevate the issue and hopefully close the gap there when it comes to the match requirement. And overall, the overall outcome is really for a more protected and healthier watershed. So hopefully only good can come from that. But that's all I have. I'm gonna turn it over to Kelly. And Kelly, I'm gonna advance your slides for you. And if folks have any questions for us, feel free to drop them in the chat box. But Kelly, take it away.
Thanks, Sandra, and hey everyone. My name is Kelly Knutson, State Policy Manager with the Coalition of the Delaware River Watershed. It's great to see you all virtually, and I appreciate you joining us. So today I'll be highlighting the Coalition's state policy efforts for New York and our legislative ask for the upcoming executive budget. In my role at the Coalition, I work closely with Friends of the Upper Delaware through our state lead program, which has one representative per basin state. FUDR acts as our main point of contact in New York and assists the Coalition with engaging our members on policy in the Upper Delaware, as long as legislators in Albany. So we've been partnering with FUDR since launching the Coalition State Lead Program in 2016 and partner with other organizations in the watershed to promote cross-state collaboration on our shared policy priorities. So other state leads for the Coalition include New Jersey League of Conservation Voters, Delaware Nature Society, and Penn Future. So each of these organizations are pivotal in representing CDRW at the State House and in district with our set of policy priorities that's determined annually. And the Coalition helps to fund these groups to enact watershed signage, strengthen plastics legislation, along with advancing funding for state and federal agencies, just to name a few. And every activity we work on showcases positive collaboration with our members. So we aim to work hand in hand with our state leads to develop sign-on letters, press releases, communication toolkits, and building and maintaining relationships with staff and more. So this year, CDRW is able to provide more dollars to FUDR to expand their advocacy capacity on policy campaigns, particularly around coalition building for state funding in the Upper Delaware, which I will highlight later in today's presentation. And with these additional funds, we're able to be more effective in New York and further build infrastructure to engage and communicate with key players throughout the region. And one method that we've been really successful with other states is, and we're now building in New York, is monthly network calls with our members to discuss strategy and advocacy for state policy priorities. And if you're interested in getting involved, please contact Jeff, Sherry, or Molly for more details. Today, we're largely going to focus on one of the coalition's top priorities for New York, and that's acquiring state funding from the governor's Environmental Protection Fund. So next slide. First, I'll debrief the fund, then explain what FUDR and the coalition is requesting in COMO's executive budget. So the Environmental Protection Fund, which is currently funded at $300 million, just celebrated its 27th year since being enacted in 1993 when I was born at $31 million. So EPF is managed by the Department of Environmental Conservation in New York and oversees the implementation of projects and programs from on-the-ground restoration, climate-smart communities, funding river basin commissions, and more. Now, historically, there's been a lack of allocated funds from the EPF to Upper Delaware that you would see elsewhere across the state. So to mend this gap, we've been advocating for the inclusion of $500,000 through EPF in COMO's executive budget. And these funds would be used to implement the objectives of the Upper Delaware River Action Agenda, which was created by FUDR and partners to implement projects that preserve water quality, improve aquatic habitat, mitigate flooding, and enhance recreational opportunities, which ultimately would further spur an economic revitalization throughout the region. And as you earlier heard from my colleague Sandra, there's ample federal dollars that's being funneled into the Upper Delaware. So we're hoping to acquire a similar investment on the state level through a match, either with EPF or the bond bill that's coming in 2021. So next slide. To showcase our strength in the Upper Delaware, we know that partnerships of all kinds are needed to demonstrate and demand, the reach of those support this advocacy request. In addition to the coalition of the Delaware River Watershed and the Tailwaters Coalition, which Jeff mentioned, FDR and New York League of Conservation voters organized a new cohort called the Alliance for the Delaware River Watershed. And the Alliance is comprised of roughly 30 or so diverse organizations solely focused on leveraging funding from the Environmental State Protection Fund. And formation of the Alliance really enabled FEDR and our partners to forge important new relationships with key decision makers in state government, including Senator Metzger, Assemblywoman Gunther, and some high-level staff within the governor's office as well. And a result, additionally, from forming this alliance and holding stakeholder sessions, both state legislators submitted EPF funding requests for the Upper Delaware River, which was a significant development and step forward in our state funding campaign. So next slide. We also submitted a member sign-on and attended an organized lobby event by the Nature Conservancy, which was held earlier this year in February, which FUDR and CDRW participated in. And this annual event brings partners from across the state to advocate for EPF in their region. We were paired, Molly and I, with 9 other organizations, which gave us an opportunity to emphasize our funding requests with Senator Metzger and other legislators in Albany. And at this point, I haven't heard if they're planning to host this event in person or virtually for 2021, but I would highly recommend and encourage interested folks to attend and really represent the Upper Delaware at the State House. And as we learn more, we'll certainly keep everyone posted on this opportunity. While state EPF funding was not secured for the Upper Delaware and 2020 state budget, the stage is now set for 2021. And we came so close last year, and we're working hard to make it happen in the upcoming budget. And part of our success will be advocating for a request earlier as negotiations and considerations for the budget are being determined. So next slide. And given COVID and travel restrictions, we'll be meeting with legislators and key players in coming weeks via Zoom and inviting your organization to get involved. So we've been conducting similar meetings in other basin states, and the outcomes have been really successful. So I'll highlight an example in Pennsylvania that just happened last week for everyone. In lieu of our annual State House Education Day in Harrisburg, PA, our state lead Penn Future, along with other coalition partners, organized a really successful virtual Clean Water Week of Action just to celebrate our watershed and advocate for our priorities to be included in Pennsylvania's state budget, like state agency funding and the full share for the river basins commissions. And events like the Virtual Week of Action are really wonderful examples of how the coalition can leverage the strength and power of our members as one voice to inform and educate decision makers throughout the watershed. It's actually been really fun to see representatives be so encouraged by our messaging and willing to champion clean water throughout the basin throughout these difficult circumstances. So we're asking folks to just please save the date. You know, these meetings in New York will occur next week on October 21st and 22nd. You can email Jeff, Sherry, or Molly at FUDR for more details. And they've booked meetings with the governor's office, Senator Metzger, and even Steve Engelbright and Todd Kleminski, the chairs of the state's Environmental Conservation Committee. So again, looking forward to engaging with these members on EPF and hope that you'll be involved in advancing this funding request for the Upper Delaware region. And in preparation, FEDR will also be hosting like a pre-strategy meeting to further familiarize members of this request, and that's on next Monday, October 19th at 4 p.m. So please let them know if you plan on attending. And next slide. With that said, I'd like to close and just invite Sandra back to answer any questions you all have, and appreciate, again, everyone joining today.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Sandra. Grant, do we have any questions in the queue?
We do not, at least to me. If anyone has questions, you can send them over to me and I can bring them up.
Okay, and I can just do some follow-up here. So I know there's a lot. So over the years, it's been interesting to sort of watch the evolution of FUDR and our partner organizations. And I know there's a lot of people on this call that, you know, are from the angling community and are keenly interested in the afternoon session that has a lot to do with reservoir management, water releases, and how the state manages the wild trout. But in my 8 years here, I'll just take advantage of this session and use Sandra and Kelly as a good example of how we're able to, the way that we can be maximally strong in any of our programmatic efforts, including FFMP, water releases, or anything else we do, is partnership building and coalition building. It's just the way it has to be done these days to build power, to gain resources. So I hope this morning session here has conveyed and illustrated, you know, the broader spectrum of work that FUDR is engaged in that isn't always in the front of mind in terms of our audience awareness of our activities. So we're glad we could use this conference and hopefully, let people know that we engage in a broad suite of activities that we attempt to tie all together and maximize our power for each individual programmatic effort that we include on our agenda. So I hope, you know, without this partnership with the coalition, for example, we would not have the connection in Washington with the congressional delegation and the funding that's available through the federal program. It all ties together that way. So I hope people are getting a better picture here of how our program efforts are tied together and and the horizons have broadened over the years. So with that. Sandra and Kelly mentioned next week at the state level, we have about 14, I think, state partners in New York. It's a broad array of groups. It's not just conservation organizations, but mostly conservation organizations. And normally, you know, in non-COVID times, we'd get everybody in cars and we'd drive up to Albany and we work all day or two talking to legislators up there about the importance of bringing resources back at the state level to the Upper Delaware River. People have to understand that although the Upper Delaware River is the center of our universe, the state of New York has incredible, iconic water bodies that traditionally have had a little bit more political punch surrounded by them. So, for example, the Great Lakes or the Long Island Sound, the Hudson River, the Adirondacks, the Finger Lakes. These are areas that for decades have attracted significant political attention and significant resources. While we all know the Upper Delaware River is so important and such a resource, such an incredible resource, it has not always been at the front of mind when it comes to decision makers at the state level. So that's what we're embarking upon now. And that is where the coalition and other partners are helping us so much. So if you want to join next week on our virtual Hill Day, we call it, it'll look a lot like this, right? Although there'll be a lot less people on it. We have 5 meetings lined up just to get the conversation started in Albany with a couple of the key state legislators who represent much of the upper Delaware River in the state of New York. State Senator Jennifer Metzger and State Assemblywoman Aileen Gunther. Some of you, I'm sure, know them, have known them for years. They're great champions of the river and they're great allies for our coalition. Then we'll be meeting with the governor's office and a couple of other legislative leaders that have a lot to say about environmental funding in the state of New York. Please contact myself, Sherry, or Molly, or Kelly, and let us know you want to join, and we'll include you. So if there are no other questions.
We now have, we have some questions. So the first one is from Nathan, and he asks if we could go over the difference between the Delaware River Conservation Fund and the Delaware River Restoration Fund.
Sandra, you want to take that one on?
Yes. So thanks for the question, Nathan. So the Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund is the program that the coalition and FUDR have been working on. That is the fund that's supported by the new program, the Delaware River Basin Restoration Program. So the fund is nested in the program. It's like the core component of the federal program. Both programs the other program that you mentioned is, both are managed by National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. I'm just going to pull up. I'm not, I know a lot about the Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund. I know a lot less about the other program, but it is, heavily supported by the William Penn Foundation and leveraging their investments within the watershed. I'm happy to send, I'm just pulling up an RFP, the old RFP that I had to kind of tell folks the difference. So the Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund, the one that we work on, aims to conserve and restore natural areas, waterways on public and private lands, supports migratory and resident wildlife and fish and native plants, and also contributes to the social health, economic vitality of the communities of the watershed. So that was the fund, again, that was launched in 2018. The other program, and let me just pull up, I'm switching between files so I can adequately answer this question. The other program, so here we go. Delaware. So the Delaware River, sorry, this is not the program. This is not the file. You know what? Can I just put, so the Delaware River Restoration Fund, I'll put this in the chat. These are targeted grants, targeted conservation grants. They're awarded to nonprofit organizations, educational institutions, local governments, and these are to implement on-the-ground restoration activities to improve water quality in one of the 7 cluster areas, which is supported by the Delaware River Watershed Initiative, or DRWI, if folks are familiar with that. And those clusters are the Poconos and Kittatinny, the Kirkwood Cohansey, New Jersey Highlands, the Middle Schuylkill, Schuylkill Highlands, Brandywine, Christina, and upstream suburban Philadelphia. So those are really, more targeted grants in conjunction with the DRWI effort. So the priority strategies is, a lot of like green infrastructure projects are awarded through that particular fund. Farms and forest projects, floodplains, wetlands, and those grants are awarded for large scale collaborative projects in those cluster areas that serve as models for restoration aggregation for the DRWI priority strategies. So similar but different in that the latter program, the Delaware River Restoration Initiative, is just eligible to those cluster geographical spaces. So I hope that answers the question. I have a link that I can plop in the chat. And yeah, if folks have any questions specifically for the Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund, which is within the Dr. Burke program, I know a lot more about that one and a lot less about the latter. So I'm happy to help.
Thank you. And we have time for one more question. So Grace Woodard asks, is there emphasis in lobbying on towns as a focus of stream protection buffer zones, either through regulation, zoning, or proclamations?
Can you repeat that question, Grant?
Yeah. Is there emphasis in lobbying on towns as a focus of stream protection buffer zones, either through regulation, zoning, or proclamations?
I don't know if Molly and Tracy are on the phone and want to take a shot at that. I'll take my own shot at it. I think Grace, you're asking, when we think about protecting rivers, we think about buffer zones because we know that they are very effective when it comes to protecting water quality and aquatic habitat. And in the upper Delaware River in New York State, I would say we tackle that probably in two different ways, depending geographically where you are. So if we're up in the upper watershed where I'm sitting right now, up in Hancock, New York, and Delaware County, our approach with that is really more of a partnership approach. We've found that to be way more effective than working through regulation. It's just, it's historically how things how things have gotten done well here is more through coalition building, partnerships, discussion, working with private property owners and farmers and that sort of thing. And then I think as you get lower down the river, there's different, if you're in Sullivan County or Orange County, you've kind of crossed over into a more of a culturally different part of the watershed. And I think there's more discussion about land use regulations and regulatory approaches to stream buffers that, may be more front of mind with key decision makers and maybe more acceptable to diverse watershed stakeholders. So I guess we tackle that in different ways, locally and regionally. And then I think up in Albany, Grace, when we talk about the Environmental Protection Fund, and I know you'll be with us next week, I think that's fair game certainly when we talk about our ask for state funding for the upper Delaware River watershed, stream buffers will be a big part of that conversation, I think. And I think the first step there will be to invest on decision makers, how important they are, why they work, why they're effective, and why we need funding for them. And then as a secondary matter, we can talk about implementation and how we actually get them on the ground. So I hope that's helpful, Grace. I see you on the screen. Maybe you can smile and shake your head yes, or you can say, no, that made no sense at all. And I don't know if Molly or Tracy or anybody else wants to take a shot at it.
I'm not sure that Tracy's on anymore right now, but I don't really have anything else to add.
Thanks. Grant, we got anything else, or can we, any other questions?
I believe we are good for now.